episode, we will be discussing the murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault of an 11-year-old boy. Listeners' discretion is advised. All right. Very much time to get into it.
Hello.
Season 3? Season 3, right? Season 3.
We are season 3, absolutely.
All
I think
right.
the bulk of season 2 was
You and Delphi?
was just me doing Delphi, that kind of stuff. And then I stepped away because Delphi was just getting too crazy. So I took a step back too, and we worked on getting some new equipment. And now we've got this new platform that we're using to record. And so
we may be
here we
keeping
go.
it. We may not be keeping the platform. So if this sounds crappy, just come back to next episode and it'll be better.
That's right. This is very much a pilot episode. Season 3 pilot episode, new software, but great equipment. Super stoked
better
about
mic,
the equipment.
Better soundboard. Actually, a soundboard, period. But without further ado, should we get into it?
Absolutely. I can't wait to hear what you've come up with.
Okay. Well, I do want to start by saying, while we talk about today's story, a lot of the information being read will come from an insane amount of research done by Madeline Barron, whom is a podcaster for In the Dark. Honestly, I feel like most people who talk about this case are going to reference her research because of this. Like, she did the longest story. She talked to the victim's parents. She talked to everybody who pretty much touched the case. And not everybody's going to do that because they're not going to talk to everybody. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're interested in this case, I do recommend reading her written story. It is very long and detailed, but it is on apmreports.org. So that being said, let's get into the abduction, molestation, and murder of Jacob Irwin Wetterling. Jacob, what? Are you excited?
I am. Well, I know this case.
Not excited, I guess.
He was missing for so long, and
very long.
Yeah, and when they finally found him, I won't get into it too much, but when they finally found him, it was obviously a huge relief for the family and everybody else in the community. But I remember there was an NHL team that actually paid tribute to him as well. So it was a pretty big deal.
Also a huge relief for the people that they were accusing of doing it with.
Yes.
This is one of those. Yeah, this is one of those cases where the police dropped the ball, big time. And
I just like to say, since we started podcasting and really researching these cases, it's really opened my eyes to how many cases are not investigated efficiently. Like
it's usually these smaller communities with police that maybe don't see this type of crime very often. They're not that equipped to, take full lead on a crime scene the second it happens. But unfortunately, they're also typically the people who are like, I don't want help. Nobody's help us.
They're not accepting of help when it's offered, nor are they reaching out for help when they should be, because they can't handle it. They don't have the resources or the experience to do that.
Unfortunately, we are definitely pulling some frustrations from Delphi, and we should probably focus more on Jacob, and they have their own set of mess ups.
Absolutely. But it's not just Delphi, it's so many, and it's crazy, but I'll let you go on. Please continue.
So Jacob Wetterling was born February 17th, 1978. He was an American boy from St. Joseph, Minnesota, who was kidnapped from his hometown and murdered on October 22nd, 1989 at the age of 11. So the identity of his abductor actually remained a mystery for nearly 27 years. Okay.
It's crazy.
So, I mean, because like I said, we're reading a lot of the research that Madeline did, she really did write it best when she said that the Wetterling case wasn't the perfect crime. It was a botched investigation. An APM reports investigation found that officers with the Stearns County Sheriff's Office failed to conduct some of the most basic police work in the critical first few hours after Jacob disappeared. They mishandled a confrontation with a key suspect, and after more than a decade of no success, they focused on the wrong guy and in the process turned one of their best witnesses into a top suspect. All along, the person who took Jacob was right in front of them. Right in front of them. Like so in front of them that you won't even believe it.
Mhm. And this is all
So,
during the same time frame that, you know, kids who had been abducted, some of them were being found alive, like, a decade later. Like, there was still hope
yeah.
out there that Jacob was alive somewhere.
There was a large amount of hope that he was still alive because this man who ended up taking him had committed other sexual assaults on little boys, but he would let them go. And they actually were calling this guy Chester the molester.
Chester the molester, yeah, that's where that was, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that. Crazy.
And so this case specifically, the failure to solve it changed the lives of millions of Americans. Parents across the Midwest stopped letting their children go outside at night. The case fueled a national hysteria over stranger danger. Kids watched public service announcements about not taking rides from strange men in white vans. It really did start that whole, that thing. Don't accept candy from white vans. Don't,
Mhm.
he doesn't really have a puppy.
Yeah,
That type of thing.
yeah,
Parents
yeah.
started fingerprinting their kids in case someone snatched them up.
Yeah,
The
I had you
pen
guys fingerprinted.
Oh,
You
did
guys
you?
had fingerprints and a lock of hair. You bet. I did the whole kit. You bet.
I did the whole kit. You probably doing around around that time maybe, well, not this time, obviously, but that you took our fingerprints, were you doing school for any
Mhm.
investigation type of
Yeah,
stuff? So, that's probably why.
yeah, and they were actually giving those kits away at some point when you
Mm,
guys were
yeah.
small. Yeah.
So the panic in this situation, let's call it, actually culminated a federal law. It's called the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act that requires all states to maintain registries of sex offenders. Thank God.
So when was this law was it passed?
Well, that it's not a law, it's an act. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. It was
Um
passed, so it must have been after the guy was finally caught.
So it was passed in 1994, and it actually would have been before the guy was caught.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Well, because they
it's
knew, right?
interesting.
There were witnesses. Let's just let you get into the story, and then we'll talk about all that.
Okay. So Jacob was in the sixth grade. He was 5 feet tall and skinny with dark brown hair. He had blue eyes like his mom. He loved watching football and playing hockey and baseball with his friends. He pretended to be a sports announcer when he watched games on TV with his dad. He wanted to be a veterinarian, when he grew up. And unfortunately, that never happened. That morning, the morning of his abduction, Jacob and his dad, Jerry, went fishing. They came back home and everyone gathered around the TV to watch the Minnesota Vikings play the Detroit Lions. Later that afternoon, they went skating at an indoor ice rink in the evening. Jacob's parents headed out to a gathering at a friend's house about 20 miles away. Their oldest child, Amy, was at a friend's house. So Jacob was at home with his brother Trevor, who was 10 years old. So they were very close in age. and his younger sister, Carmen, who was 8. His best friend, Aaron Larson, came over for a sleepover and they ate pizza and hung out for a while until some point the boys came up with a plan to rent a movie from a nearby Tom Thumb store. But first, of course, they needed permission. The boys had never biked to the store that late before, so they ended up calling their parents. Patty told Trevor no because it was too dark, and then Trevor asked to talk to his dad, kind of like the typical, like, oh, you say no, I'm going to try again, but with the other parent. Jerry wasn't sure about the plan either. Mostly, but you know how like dads will look at their sons and they're like, they'll be fine. Like I used to do that when I was 8, and they're 10 and
That's right,
11.
and they're trying to give them a little bit more freedom, trying to, let them
hmm
be trying to let them be
He
responsible and
his
yeah.
mind wasn't going towards, well, what if somebody, purposefully grabs them? His mind was more so, okay, well, make sure that you can be seen in the dark. Take your reflective vest so that you
Mhm.
don't get hit by a car. That's how
Yeah,
Jerry was thinking, made sure that they would do that. And then that was his yes to them. Take a
right.
flashlight, wear your reflective vest.
Very much
Jacob,
a dad's,
dad way of
way of
thinking.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Jacob called the next door neighbor, who was 14-year-old Rochelle Jerzek, and asked her to babysit Carmen. Rochelle came over and watched as Jacob put on an orange reflective vest over his red hockey jacket. The boys headed out. The route the boys took that night was pretty simple. The Tom Thumb store was about 15 minutes into town, but via bike ride. It was up on a dead end country road that leads from the cul-de-sac where the Wetterlings lived into town. There's not much in between, just some cornfields and some woods and, the random houses, just like you would kind of see when you're driving down where like there's some farm roads and stuff.
Mhm.
As they biked up the road, the boys passed a long gravel driveway. And somewhere close to that driveway, they heard a rustling sound in the corn. They kept going. They got to Tom Thumb and rented the Naked Gun and then started to head back home. They passed the few blocks of houses and the lights of the town faded away. They biked past woods and the cornfields, and there was no sidewalks and no street lights. Not even the moon was out, according to Madeline's thing, which is very interesting. So
It's very dark.
the little boys who recounted it are obviously telling her that it just felt really dark.
Mhm.
The only light came from a flashlight that Trevor flashed in front of them. They approached the long gravel driveway, the spot where they'd been previously when they heard the rustling. And unfortunately, they were almost at home when all of a sudden a man appeared on the road and started walking toward them. He was dressed in all black. His face was covered with something dark. It was hard to tell what, but later on, they said that it kind of looked like nylon. The man told the boys he had a gun. He ordered them into the ditch and told them to lie down. At first, Jacob's best friend Aaron thought it was just some kind of a prank. Maybe an older kid was messing with them, kind of an early Halloween joke. The man told Trevor to turn off his flashlight and he asked Trevor his age. So once again, Trevor was 10 years old and he then told Trevor, because he was the younger of the two, barely. He told him to run as fast as he could into the woods or he'd shoot. Next, he turned to Aaron and asked him his age, and Aaron said 11. The man grabbed Aaron in the crotch and groped him. The man asked Jacob his age, and of course, he was also 11. The man told Aaron to run as fast as he could into the woods or else he'd shoot. Aaron took off running. By the time he looked back, the man and Jacob were gone. It was about 9:20 p.m., and Jacob was never seen alive again. So let's get into the investigation, which was a shit show.
What a nightmare for those boys. Like, I can't even imagine how terrifying that would have been to turn around and see Jacob gone. Um,
And
yeah.
especially for Aaron, the fact that he got groped and then the
Mhm.
man, like, I'm not sure what he was looking for, but he obviously felt something. Or actually, no, I do believe he ended up, once we know who it is later on, he ended up admitting that he found Jacob to be more attractive,
More attractive, that's exactly what he
which
said.
is
Yeah,
disgusting, obviously. But
it is. It was in his age range, but I mean, they were all, but he found Jacob to be the most attractive.
yeah, but he did say that he didn't like that. He like, and it's such a ridiculous statement because his younger brother was 10.
Mhm.
So, like, I don't know how his brain works, but he did say something along the lines of, like, Trevor was too young, which is
Yeah.
just, it doesn't make sense, but it's weird. So by January, because this was October,
Mhm.
by January, they had taken most of the investigators and agents off the case, which I thought was a little bit sad. But
So
unlike Delphi, sorry.
do you get into the fact that that same night, the homeowner of that driveway had called in to report a vehicle in his cornfield? Like, he noticed headlights out in his cornfield?
Well, we do get into quite a bit because I think you're talking about the music teacher.
Yeah.
And he ended up, so when they asked him what if he's seen anything suspicious, he actually ended up stating two vehicles were kind of suspicious. And that wouldn't have really assisted them because it kind of sent them down the thinking that this guy had a vehicle right there and he didn't. So it's kind of weird because they were looking at one set of tire tracks, but they weren't like taken into evidence properly, and they let a different vehicle drive through it anyway, which it was actually
Mhm.
the music teacher that next morning
Mhm.
going to work. So there's just so much to it. But yeah, I do have some of the information in here for sure, just going through the rest of that night and how the investigation was botched. Because the
Mhm.
second that Jacob went missing, now this is a discussion on how the police went into action. So even Al Garber wrote in Striving to Be the Best that the FBI's encounter with Danny Heinrich, Heinrich is how I want to say this POS's name, in 1990 was a comedy of errors and a bad mistake. Before this, about 9 months, I believe, 12-year-old Jared Sherrill was taken, sexually assaulted, and let go in nearby Cold Spring. So one of the boys that was sexually assaulted but let go. He was doing this before he took Jacob and killed him. The semi interesting thing about like the victims before Jacob is that now they're adults and some of them have done interviews and whatnot. Jared told us in 2014 that his abductor let him go after threatening him. So he said that I was dropped off and told to run, don't look back, where he would shoot. So obviously that's a little bit of his MO that he would tell them, don't look back or I'll shoot you.
Yeah.
So at the press conference in 1989, investigators unveiled a sketch that Jared had helped create, which bears a striking resemblance to Danny Heinrich. So again, he's the POS. The FBI interviewed Danny for the first time 2 days later. They then surveilled Danny for weeks without success. Allegedly, I suppose. They really didn't see him doing weird stuff, which is kind of hard to believe. But also, January of 1990, the FBI had determined Danny's shoe print and tire track were consistent with prints left at the Wetterling scene, which is weird because later on we find out that a man named Kevin and his girlfriend left the track there. Like, they didn't really get witness statements properly, and they ended up finding out that they had seen stuff like the bikes that were left from the boys, and they thought it was weird. So it was a very like small time frame where before the police got there, they must have seen it. They did a U-turn, they looked. It was their tire tracks. Innocent bystanders that didn't know kind of
Mhm.
thing. They thought that the bikes being there were weird, and they did volunteer the information for police to just not really focus on it, I guess. So I'm kind of focusing on Jared's case a little bit just because it really does highlight the rest of the investigation for Jacob's case and how bad it really was. Because Garber wrote, finally, we convinced the county attorney to charge the man with the Cold Spring, Jared's kidnapping, and it proved to be a bad mistake. So Danny was arrested on February 9th, 1990, and they wrote, this is when he said, like, what followed was a comedy of errors. FBI profilers were flown into St. Cloud to help with Danny's interrogation. He was in the Minnesota National Guard at the time. FBI profilers placed a flag and special lights in the room, but Danny said he wanted a lawyer, and that was the end of the interview. Danny himself described the encounter in a WCCO undercover investigation in 1996. He pretty much said that he was sitting there and they were saying, we know it's you, it's you, it's you, it's you. And he just kept saying, no, it isn't, no, it isn't, no, it isn't, until he finally said, I have nothing more to say until I speak to a lawyer. The charges were dropped and Danny was released. Garber writes that the county attorney never wanted to charge Danny and that the FBI did not tell BCA that the charges were coming. The BCA agents and the county attorney were furious with Garber and his co-workers, if you will. There were a couple sketches made, some looking spot on like Danny. But because at the end of the driveway where the boys were taken led to the house where a music teacher lived, the cops kind of had their blinders on and they were focused on that guy a bit instead of a true pedophile and killer. So it's kind of weird because this music teacher's name is also Danny. I'm going to call him Dan. Dan equals innocent. Danny equals POS. Piece of shit. All right? And yes, I could do the last name. I choose not to because I hate last names. It's my stance, and I'm sticking with it.
Yeah.
So he did end up telling the police about those two sus vehicles. He helped police look through all the buildings nearby and really helped them search everywhere. No police came back to the farm at first, though, which was weird to him, and he actually ended up speaking out not only to the police when they especially start accusing him, but even when he didn't even know that um, the mother of Jacob met with him while she was wired, while they were looking at him thinking that it was him. And he pretty much told her, it's not me. And if you want to look at somebody, look at the police because they sucked and they botched this whole thing. Which is so funny because police were listening, thinking this motherfucker.
Yeah. But he wasn't wrong. Like,
No, he wasn't wrong at all, not even a little bit. And he had facts to back it up. Even back then, he knew that like just an innocent person watching what the police were doing knew that they were not doing their due diligence. So if a normal person knows it, the police must have known it to a degree, which is crazy because the FBI had their fingers in here as well. So honestly, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but luckily the person did end up getting caught. It just lasted, it took way too long. So what we really need to know about those sketches, though, is that they were really good. There were footprints and those tire tracks that they processed at the crime scene as well. But that's pretty much the police's due diligence done with this one. That's pretty much all they really did. One cop actually even accidentally let Dan drive across the crime scene to leave his house. like literally told him, yeah, go this way. And it was right across the crime scene into the ditch. Like silly, silly stuff. There was a victim, another young boy, who came forward 2 days after Jacob was taken to say, hey, there's been a string of attacks slash molestations in this area. There's similar victims, including myself and my friend. And you can find interviews with this victim as well. His name is Dr. Chris Bertelson. And it's pretty interesting, and he ended up saying that I think it was his friend who said, like, you already got me. And it
Mhm.
made Danny leave. He was like, oh shit, then I better get out of here if I already got you. And it wasn't true, but the kid was like, he just said it because he was just kind of like, please leave me alone kind of thing.
Yeah, didn't that kid have a history of being abused? So
I
he,
think so.
like, he knew he kinda knew how to conduct himself, but, I
Mhm.
mean, how devastating is that to even think of, but that's what I heard anyway.
Yeah, well, I heard from, like I said, the doctor, so, like, I think it would have been maybe down the line a little bit if he said that as well about him, but I'm not 100% sure. But it is very sad, like you said, and even sadder that it was amongst these kids that they called him the unknown creep, the Chester the
Chester the
molester.
molester.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not
Uh,
such a small community and to have 'cause, I don't know, so many kids from the same group had so many encounters with this creep, you
Yeah,
know?
or, like, their form of, I grew up with, like, Bloody Mary, which was obviously supernatural, but their form was sitting back to back if they went camping and they heard a noise in the woods,
Yeah,
and they were afraid that it was a real person there who might do something to them, and they'd sit back to back holding their pocket knives that they had for camping. That's
mhm.
one story that he tells, so you
Yeah,
can just really
it wasn't a ghost story, it was a, "This guy is for sure out there." Yeah.
yeah,
How
this is real.
terrifying.
Yeah,
Ugh, terrible.
so horrible. So there were multiple leads that the police didn't fully follow up on. Obviously, at least for very many years. They did a hypnosis on Dan, the music teacher, not the POS. I'm just going to keep doing that just so that we're 100% sure who we're talking about. And if you watch the hypnosis, even just a little bit, we can play a little bit here. It is just sad, and it didn't reveal anything except that he felt some form of guilt of feeling like he could have done something that would have saved this little boy. So I'll play that here.
Do you feel kind of guilty or something that you didn't? Yeah. I could have stopped it from happening.
Honestly, that's all I'm gonna play. It's too sad.
It is very sad. He sounds, like, completely distraught.
Once the case started going cold, and I say that loosely because this is the early 80s, late 70s. So to an extent, they only had so much information slash resources. People noticed that there were no more molestations, attacks going on. Obviously, whatever happened with Jacob scared the dude into hiding. So the attention on Jacob's case was obviously going to be too much for him to strike again. So throughout the 90s and the 2000s, they would follow up with most leads, and back during this time, kind of reminding me of West Memphis 3, is people started to blame devil worshippers and
Mm,
Satanists for this murder, which
yeah.
honestly doesn't help anything to do with any case because there's a possibility there every single time that you're just covering up for some normal white man who looks just like he's chilling on your street.
Yeah. Satanic panic. It was real.
Satanic panic. Yeah. So then in 2004, 15 years after Jacob went missing, they identified the vehicle seen in the music teacher Dan's driveway.
The one he saw
The one you
when
talked
he
about.
reported
Mm-hmm.
just seeing the headlights kind of thing. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, down the road, like in 2004, that's when he elaborated more on what he did see. Even so
Mm-hmm.
much as at one point, didn't he say that he thinks he saw Jacob looking out the window? Which I'm not going to say anything else. You go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I like it. Say what you've seen, right? Because I'm not going to read I don't have time to read like 50
So,
different
okay,
accounts,
well,
but
he had said that he saw the headlights like turning around in his cornfield, and he was watching the car, and he thinks he might have saw Jacob in the car looking out the window. And at the time, he didn't think anything of it, just that somebody was on his property that shouldn't be. But when down the road, when this guy was caught, he said that he made Jacob get down on the floor so nobody would see him. So, you know, who do you
well,
believe?
honestly, it's really sad. The way the police hounded him anyway, like that could literally just be him being traumatized and imagining, okay, you know what? There's even more I could have done. You know what? I think I even seen him. Like that
Hmm.
could be part of that because he was even second guessing himself and feeling bad because he went to work the next day.
Hmm.
Because as soon as police started looking at him, media was diving down his and his parents' throat looking for
Hmm.
information, like, sitting outside their house. And then that slowly trickles into the community. And then the community was blaming him and saying, well, why would you go to work the next day? And
Well, the
he's
media also made it seem like he saw these headlights or whatever, and then he heard a couple hours later that a little boy was abducted on that route, and then he just went to bed, and that wasn't the case. He
no.
said that he
Mhm.
went out with a flashlight and he checked all of his outbuildings, and he did look around and he didn't see anything.
Yeah, and he's the one who had to say to police, like, "Do you guys want to search the property? Do
Mhm.
you want to search all of these side buildings? Like, are we
Yeah,
gonna start looking at this?" And it was until days later that the police even did that.
yeah,
So, he did care about it, but to the police, they were like, "Well, you know who probably did it right at the end of the driveway? We don't think that there was a vehicle involved, so the only thing that makes sense is this guy." And guess what? His parents were gone that night, so he decided to sit in
yeah,
his cornfield and wait for little boys to drive by.
that's right, yeah,
Make it make sense, but whatever.
yeah.
Um,
And let's be real, mainstream media recently, we we've come to find out that they will report on certain aspects of stories and statements, but very rarely do we hear the whole story.
ew. Yeah, and I'm not gonna be one of the people who say that it's just mainstream media. It's all media, and um, it's just a fact. People's opinions. It's human nature. People's opinions end up going into a story. As somebody who worked in journalism, and I've just grown to try and be as biased as I can. Even I had stories that like people would jump on, and it would be like, ugh, ugh. Unfortunately, when you're the media, you can't get it right and you can't get it wrong. So, you do one story on it, but guess what? Everybody else is doing a story on it as well, and they think you're reliable. So now it's like a river trickle effect of everybody going for a source that they thought was reliable, is how I see it anyway.
Yeah, no, fair enough, fair enough.
Unfortunately, because of all of that, Dan, the music teacher, was feeling pretty shitty about himself. Um, so this is when people start to go to town on Dan. The person who drove that vehicle came forward almost immediately. Once the police reviewed 15 years later, they noticed these mistakes and that they also make their own, like, preconceptions at first. Because I don't think the vehicle that he's seen, Shar, I don't believe that was actually Danny. So I don't think it's possible that he would have
Oh, you
seen Jacob.
don't?
No, I don't. I don't think he parked there. I think he parked. I think he parked a bit down the street, not the
Oh,
driveway. Hmm.
see, and I mean, I could be mistaken, but I thought he
Unless he
admitted
used
that
it to
he
turn around, which is
I
very
thought
possible.
he said that he was parked on the other side of the cornfield and walked through and then used the cornfield to turn around. But
Okay, so yeah, to turn around that might make sense. What we should do at the end of this is because he ended up taking a plea deal, which is jumping forward a little bit, but it was in kind of like he had to tell his story and say where Jacob was. So it would be interesting. Maybe we'll just pull that up and we'll read what he ended up saying happened out of his own words,
mhm,
which should be loosely taken because I mean he is
yeah,
a pedo, but
and he's still gonna minimize, yeah, for sure.
yeah. So one thing that I thought was very interesting was kind of almost how confrontational Dan, the music teacher, was with police. So when they're like trying to convict him of it in interrogation statements, um, the way he fights back, he's like, "Well, it was so sloppy that I could have done it and been off scot free."
Yes,
Like
yeah,
imagine saying that to police. That's pretty funny. He was, and like they're like, "What do you mean by that?" He's like, "I mean, you guys suck."
yeah.
Not
Yeah, not
exactly the
exactly
smartest
the
thing
way
to
to
do, but
convince them of your innocence, for sure.
yeah, yeah. For a second, like it came off as a cocky
Mhm,
person who
arrogant.
did it, who believes they're getting away with it.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, and I'm sure hindsight, he probably regretted that.
Yeah, and he probably did, but I think he was also frustrated, and again, when they said, like, What do you mean by that?" About it being sloppy, he pointed out the fact that they didn't search the farm buildings for days. And
And
when
he's
they
not wrong, like,
No, he's not wrong at all, he's
yeah, he had a
right.
point.
His
Totally
delivery was just
frustrated, and it came out.
it was emotional, his delivery was emotional.
Yeah,
And this is probably that it was like a new set of, officers interrogating him because now there's a team looking at what the officers at the time were doing and they're thinking, "Oh, these guys are idiots. Wow, what failures as cops. We're better." And then little do they know they're also messing up at first. They do end up getting there, so you have to give them that, but they still do also mess up. Um, so during that interrogation, they're asking him like, "Where's Jacob's body?" And Dan, the music teacher, maintained his innocence, and he pretty much said that this has ruined him. The media is something that he really focused on for him and his family. What he felt really, shined the light on him. Um, and it's kind of sad because I know that you also watched when they end up kind of storming his house with his parents there, and his
yeah,
dad is,
and
like,
the
begging
audio of
him.
his dad.
And his mom is bawling and saying,
Mm,
like, "Get out of my house," like, oh,
mhm,
and they're unfortunately, his dad is kinda threatening them a little bit with a shotgun, so, I mean,
yeah,
at that point, there's no going back, and they need the shotgun, and he doesn't wanna give it, and she's saying, "Get out," and it's a mess, but it's super sad and emotional at the same time.
yeah, knowing what we know now, but if you put yourself in the moment trying to figure out what happened to this boy and they were thoroughly convinced, I can understand it, but
Yeah, they were thoroughly
knowing
convinced,
yeah,
exactly.
knowing what we know now, it was tragic.
And yeah, and they wanted to look at, like, any burn pits and da 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 da, so they were
Yeah,
looking through everything, but really all they ever found, if there were remains, they were for animals, whether
mhm,
deer, stuff like that.
yeah,
Um, Something weird that I seen while looking at this case, that made me think of that one woman, I don't even remember how long ago it was, but she was claiming to be that little girl who went missing. Do you
Madeline
know who I'm talking
McCann.
about? Yeah.
Yeah.
The same thing happened with this case, and I thought that was weird. A
Yeah,
man
right.
contacted
Yeah.
Patty and said he was Jacob, and she was like, okay. And they went as far as checking the blood type, which when that woman was on Dr. Phil, he was kind of saying, like, well, there's things we can do to see,
Mhm.
which that story is so dead now. And I'm guessing it's because they did some kind of test and proved that it wasn't her.
Yeah, they did. They did the test on the
Fraternity or
mother
something.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to prove it,
Yeah.
and her birth dates didn't line up, and yeah, they
It's
pretty
like,
much proved that it's not her.
it's that meme where it's like, it happened once, and it's kind of weird though, right? That it happened twice. Like, I'm sure it happens
Mhm,
more often, but
mhm,
it's just really a sad thing to think about for Patty, Jacob's mom. The fact that
mhm.
she was like, okay, well, she had some kind of hope to it,
And
and
willing to
through,
track down every single
yeah,
lead, right? I mean, who as a mom, who wouldn't? But
different
it's
blood type
terrible.
wasn't him.
Yeah.
Big sad, and they had to keep trucking through.
Mhm,
And also, just on a side note, because we do often talk about mental illness when we're talking about these cases, I think that there's maybe this guy who claimed that it was him and that chick, there
mhm.
has to be a similar mental illness or personality disorder, something that makes people want to claim the life of someone else who is missed and loved, is what I
Yeah.
was thinking, trying to put myself in their shoes, which is also sad for their part as well. I don't think these people are doing it to be malicious is what I'm saying. That's the sad part to it.
Some of them, I think, would be looking for some kind of
Clout.
attention, clout, right? Like, I wish I could remember her name, but the one that thought that that was trying to make people believe that she was Madeline McCann. I think that she was trying to have a social media presence before she did that and kinda
So
dove
it's
in.
this,
Like,
oh god, I hit
her
my mic.
history was a little bit sketch before that. So, I don't know enough to really get into it, but it totally depends on the individual and the
You
more
have to
more
be
things go
some
on.
level of ill
Delusional? Yeah.
ill to be able to, like, go on Dr. Phil and, like, double up, triple up on it. Like,
Oh,
I couldn't
absolutely.
get grilled like that at Dr. Phil. If she already had her fame at a certain point there,
Mhm.
and I don't know. She has to be some kind of crazy or ill, which can be the same thing. Okay, sorry. Moving on. Like I said before, Dad met with Patty once while she was wired. They really thought that he did it. Police, I mean, thought that he did it. And obviously, Patty probably was just going with police for a little bit there because she just wanted to know who took her son. And that's when he told her that the police and FBI were idiots. And he said that, by the way. No, he like literally said that. He was like, all I can say is the police and FBI are idiots.
Yeah,
And
she
then
was
the
wearing a wire
police are
and I've heard
listening.
that recording, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Do we want to play a clip of the sadness?
Which sadness.
The father yelling at them to get out of the house.
Sure.
No, you're not gonna go get it. I'll give you the shotgun. Yes, but you get out of this house.
For God's sake,
Get out, I'll give you the shotgun.
no.
Get out of this house. Get out of here. Get out of here. Calm down. Get out of this house. We're walking out. Rita, we gotta leave. Come on. It's either that or Jim.
Oh, for
Come on.
God's sake.
Come on, let's go with the dance.
Oh,
Rita,
my God.
you have to leave.
I won't leave.
Okay, you're under arrest. You're going to jail.
Oh.
Stand up or you're going to jail.
Yeah, they tried to file a complaint, but unfortunately it went nowhere like most complaints in this situation do. The investigators had a roundtable type of thing. They reviewed everything. They had some fresh eyes review as well. And that's when they noticed the man who was charged and released and how much information matched him and what they thought that he did back in the 90s. And this is Danny. They were like, oh, we need to look into this, obviously. At this point, Danny was 53 and still looked like the sketches. Like, he still looked like the sketches. He looks like them. You could look at him, you look at the sketches. It's the same person. He matched the descriptions and he wore similar clothes. He had the twang that was described, all of it. Police got a warrant to search Danny's house and his parents' house. 2015 warrant allowed police to search for human remains and look at electronics and pretty much everything he had. They noticed a few things of interest, and before even doing so, the conversation that they had with Danny to kind of say, like, well, we got a warrant and we want to look at your house and just see if there's anything that we'll find. During that conversation, Danny warned them about a few things, including porn, and then slowly kind of says, well, there's this kind and this kind. And the police actually kind of push for it. Like, what are we going to find? Is it, do you have some child porn? He's like, yeah, some. They're like, well, that's not that bad. Like, just trying to make him feel okay that they're about to find what they really did find, which was 19 3-ring binders filled with pornography, child pornography, other things as well. Some being children with clothes on, some with children without their clothes on, some taken online, some taken from just himself, whether it was, there was one where he had, I can't remember if it was a piece of candy or something like that, cliche. He had put it down near his front door. So when the newspaper boy came, bent over to grab it, and he filmed this little boy picking it up. Like, he was disgusting. And he ended up just calling himself and summing himself up to be a dirty old man during that conversation before the warrant.
You don't realize what I went through back in that day.
No, I don't. I know you don't want to talk about it.
No, I really don't.
But all I got is a couple little police reports. They didn't do police reports like they do now, so I don't have a lot of information.
So,
can you remember back what they all talked to you back in the day, or?
I'd rather not go over it. I've got better feelings over it. And,
but you do know you're not under arrest. You can leave whenever you want.
Well,
we do have to search it. We have a warrant, which I'll give you a copy, so we have the right to be here.
Yeah, I'm a dirty old man.
I mean, if you're saying you actually have like a big tote full of them,
Oh, that's a load of them.
like 100 or more, or
Several hundred or better.
700 or better. Good pieces.
There was a point in that interview too where they come right out and asked him, "Did you kill Jacob Wetterling?" He's like, "No."
So yeah, he was a gross person.
Just that during that interview, like he was rambling on about some of the things that the police had asked him way back in the day, quote unquote, about, did you kill Jacob Wetterling? And he, no. And what, did you bury him? And then he kind of cut himself off there and kind of trailed off. It was just very
suspect.
Yes,
Suspicious.
and eerie to go back and watch after knowing what we know now.
Yeah, and you can tell with his body language and everything, he is like, fuck. Shit. Like,
Yeah.
He knew. He knew he was caught. He knew that it was over, and he didn't actually look that sad about it. Like, he was kind of like, well, I got the many years that I did. It didn't even affect him. He was still able to commit all these horrible crimes and live the life that he wanted, and then go to jail for like the rest of his little whatever. It's stupid. So he spent nearly a year in jail awaiting trial. 3 weeks before the trial was set to begin, near the end of August 2016, his lawyers helped him arrange an unusual plea deal. Maybe not that unusual, but still. Danny would publicly confess to kidnapping Jacob and Jared, and he would lead authorities to Jacob's remains. So maybe he didn't have to confess to everybody, but Jared was a big investigation, and also they were trying to charge him with it back in the day. So they wanted to make sure that he was admitting to that. And obviously Jacob, because they needed to know where Jacob's remains were.
And
And
also a big part of that deal was he didn't want to plead guilty to any child pornography or anything like that. So
Mhm.
that was
In
one of the things that
exchange,
they agreed on, right? In exchange for a full confession on Jacob, he didn't get charged with any of the child porn stuff.
yeah. In exchange, prosecutors would not charge him with kidnapping or murdering Jacob and would drop all but one of the child pornography counts against him. Authorities would also agree not to ask Danny about the Painesville cases or any other crimes.
Oh,
Danny would.
see, I had that backwards. I thought that he was charged with Jacob and wasn't charged with molestation, but it was the opposite.
Danny
Crazy.
would plead guilty to the one count of child pornography and would serve 17 to 20 years in prison, and he'd be in his early 70s when he got out. U.S. Attorney Andy Luger took the deal. In September, Danny appeared in a packed federal courtroom in Minneapolis. I can say it, but I have to focus. He walked up to face the judge with an attorney on either side and began to talk. His confession was graphic, awful, and detailed, much more detailed than a lot of people expected. He laid out a whole story with action, second guessing, reflection, and dialogue. Second guessing meaning, the thoughts that he had with every choice that he made. After Danny was done talking about the Wetterling kidnapping, he told the story of what he did to Jared. And Jared was sitting in the courtroom just a few feet away. Danny laid out the story the same way with detail and dialogue. And then Danny started going into a part of the story that Jared had never even heard before. He described in graphic detail a sex act he said he forced on Jared. And he said that as he did it, he told Jared, if you throw up, I'll kill you. I will kill you. Oh, God. So gross. Jared started to feel sick to his stomach because Danny had never said that to him. And that part of the story wasn't true. And he was certain of it. So Jared was certain that it wasn't true. So it's either, is he lying? Is he making up his own fantasy? Or is he getting his boys confused?
Probably what it is. He's just
Mm-hmm.
his memories are skewed and blended. Probably did it to so many different boys.
Yeah. And like, I understand where Jared is coming from in this next little portion. I don't believe that Danny did this to dig at Jared. I truly believe he was a sick fuck who had so many victims that a little boy was a little boy to him at this point. But Jared said, quote, I personally took it as a shot at me. And that's the moment where I just kind of wanted to stand up and say, you don't have a right to tell your accounts. I'll tell you my accounts. So yeah, it's pretty sad.
And fair.
So fair. The most important part of the plea deal involved Jacob's remains. It was his greatest point of leverage. That's why they dropped so many charges and stuff against him. It's because at the end of the day, he's already gotten to live over 20 years of prime 20 years of his life. And now it's about Jacob and his remains. How do we get those back? So he really did have one of the greatest levels of leverage there. He was the only one who knew the location of the site. According to law enforcement, he'd kept it secret for nearly 27 years. Therefore, no witnesses around him, nobody else really knew. It was such an important piece of information that authorities agreed to let him get away with murder in exchange for revealing it. At the news conference announcing the plea deal, one of the prosecutors said he wasn't sure if anyone had searched the area before where they actually found the body, where they were led to. And he ended up saying that it was very remote. But days before an agreement to the plea deal was reached, investigators got Danny out of jail, put him in handcuffs, and loaded him into a car. Danny brought them to the area he said he had taken Jacob Wetterling on the night of October 22nd, 1989, sexually assaulted him, killed him, and buried his body. Authorities haven't revealed the exact spot where he murdered Jacob, but they found it by piecing, like news found it by piecing together information from property records and Danny's confession, not to mention interviews with neighbors and other records.
But he also, he had buried him and then went back and still saw his coat, I believe.
Yeah, I get there.
So okay. I'll let you go. Okay.
The place where Danny murdered Jacob was not a remote area. So again, that was what I was saying was what police said. The place where Danny murdered Jacob was not a remote area. It was just outside of downtown Painesville, right off the main road into town, out in a field near a gravel pit. It wasn't a random location either. This was a spot that Danny knew well. It was the place where Dwayne Hart, the sexual psychopath who lived in Painesville, used to take boys and sexually assault them when Danny was a kid. It was the place that had a nickname that was familiar to Danny's childhood friends, the ones who said law enforcement never talked to them. It was called the Big Valley. In Danny's confession, he said he moved Jacob's remains across the street about a year after the murder and buried them in a hole about 2 feet deep. That's the spot where Danny led authorities in August. It's in a cow pasture owned by a farmer named Doug Voss. The investigators' plan was to use a metal detector to try and get a reading on the metal buttons from Jacob's red jacket that he had worn that night. For nearly 27 years, investigators had told people to be on the lookout for Jacob's red jacket. They even had a replica made of it just so everyone would know what it looked like. The red jacket was the most recognizable sign of Jacob. It was what everyone had been looking for since that first night. And out in the pasture that day, as they got closer, an investigator noticed something poking out of the dirt, which was a piece of red fabric. It was the jacket right there, sticking out of the mud in Doug Voss's cow pasture, right across from the Big Valley, just out there for anyone to see. And Madeline wrote it so well, and it gives you chills.
It does, to think that all those years that went by, nobody went around that area or close
Not
enough or
even
paid
Doug
attention to
Voss.
notice it. Right. Like it's just.
And it's even more suspicious because there was a group of people. It wasn't just one person. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't a huge secret, at least. This place had a name, the Big Valley. So you're telling me somehow nobody ever went there and seen it? It's just absolutely insane and disheartening, truly. So what we did say was, let's see if we can find, because I mean, we're not really one of those podcasts that self-edit ourselves. We don't censor ourselves. So let's see if we can find this guy's, what would it be called? Would it be testimony? No.
Confession.
So now to end this off, we are going to read the transcript from his confession with Shar reading as the district attorney, or is that what you said that you were?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will
be the prosecutor.
I'll be Danny POS.
On October 22nd, 1989, did you kidnap, sexually assault, and murder Jacob Wetterling?
Yes, I did.
I need you to tell the court what happened on that evening beginning around 8 p.m. in the city and town of St. Joseph, that area.
I was driving on a road, a dead-end road. I noticed 3 children on their bicycles with a flashlight. I pulled into a driveway, passed after they passed me, turned around, and faced the direction of the road that they were coming back on. Approximately 20 minutes or so later, they came back. I stepped out of my car. I put a mask on. I reached for my revolver. I proceeded onto the road. I confronted them. I told them to get into the ditch with their bicycles. They cooperated. They did. I asked their names, their ages.
Do you recall what their answers were?
Not right offhand. I don't know.
Do you know that the 3 children involved were Jacob Wetterling, Trevor Wetterling, and Aaron Larson?
That's correct.
You indicated that you took out your revolver. Can you please describe the revolver? What caliber and type was it?
.38 Special Smith & Wesson snub nose.
After you confronted the children, what did you ask them to do?
I asked. Well, they offered me a tape, and I knocked that down. They tried to shine a flashlight in my face, and I said, no, don't do that.
The tape was a videotape
Yes.
that they had rented
Yes.
from the local store?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
After you knocked it down, what did you say to them?
I told Trevor and Aaron to run away, not look back, or I would shoot, and I took Jacob back to my car.
What did you do when you took Jacob back to your car?
I handcuffed him and put him in the front passenger seat of my car.
Did you handcuff him behind his back?
Yes.
After you handcuffed him, did Jacob Wetterling say anything to you?
What did I do wrong?
Okay. What did you do after you placed him in your vehicle?
I got into my car and we drove out of town, out of St. Joe. On the way out of St. Joe, I had the scanner on. A lot of police activity started coming over the radio, so I decided I would head back to my hometown of Painesville.
Now, you said a scanner. Can you just briefly describe the scanner?
A Regency 50 channel scanner.
For the purpose of listening to
Police calls, that's correct.
Did you instruct Jacob Wetterling to do anything while you were driving on that road?
On the way out of St. Joseph, I told him to duck down, lean forward in the seat. When we got out of St. Joe, I told him he could sit back up.
Did he make any statements to you at that time?
No, he did not.
Could you, as best as you can, please describe the route that you took from the point of what would have been the Razor Farm to the point you ended up?
Got back on the road that the boys were on. We headed not to Main Street, but back to, I don't know, Highway 75, whatever. That runs back to St. Cloud, that direction, and we headed west on that road. And I got on the interstate and headed north to Albany. From Albany, I got off the interstate and hit another country road that went to Roscoe, Minnesota. And then from Roscoe, I headed east or west on 23 to Painesville.
Okay, and where specifically in Painesville did you go?
I went to that. When I got to Painesville, before I got to Painesville, I turned on the Sewage Pond Road. About 100 yards up that road, there is an approach and to a field next to a grove of trees.
And this area, is there also a gravel pit in that area?
There was then, yes.
This was an area with which you were familiar, is that right?
Yes, it is.
What happened when you pulled the vehicle into the area near the gravel pit?
I drove as close as I could to a grove of trees. I stopped the car. I got out. I opened the door for Jacob. I unhandcuffed him. I took him over to the edge of the grove of trees. I asked him to undress. I undressed. I touched his... Okay, I'm sorry. Pause. Am I supposed to say all this?
Yeah. You said we don't edit ourselves, so
I
do
don't
that.
think we do. All right. Okay. All right.
We got
Unpause.
through West the Island Dodd. We can do it.
Yeah, true. Okay. Unpause. I undressed. I touched his penis. He touched my penis. I had him masturbate. In about 20 or so minutes, about a half hour later, he said, I'm cold. And I said, okay, you can get dressed. And I got dressed.
Okay, I need to clarify a few things.
Sure.
With the touching, this was something you compelled him to do?
Yes,
He knew that you were armed, is that right?
that's right.
And in terms of any other sexual acts performed upon Mr. Wetterling,
No, there was not.
so there was no penetration
No penetration.
and no forced oral
No,
sex?
no, there was not.
All right. After you were finished, you indicated that Mr. Wetterling said something?
He said, I'm cold. So I said, okay, you can get dressed. And I got dressed. On the way, I said, are you taking me home? I said, I can't take you all the way home. There is a lot. You live in a town or so away.
What was his reaction to that?
He started to cry. I said, don't cry.
Now, before this point, sir, had you noticed any law enforcement in the area?
Yes, on the way back to the car, there was a patrol car that came down the road with no siren with its lights, and it headed east on Painesville. I panicked. I pulled the revolver out of my pocket. It was never loaded until that point. I loaded it with 2 rounds. I told Jacob to turn around. I had to go to the bathroom. He didn't know what I was doing.
You told him that you had to go to the bathroom?
I had to go to the bathroom. I asked him to turn around.
Did he do so?
Yes, he did.
And then what happened?
I raised the revolver to his head. I turned my head. I clicked it once because it didn't line up the first chamber. I pulled the trigger again. It went off. I looked back. He was still standing. He hadn't fallen. I raised the revolver again and shot him again. And that's when he fell to the ground.
After Jacob Wetterling fell to the ground, at some point, did you check and find that, in fact, he was dead?
Yes, he was. I did check.
Just for clarification, were you under the influence of any drugs or alcohol at the time?
No, I was not.
So you were sober, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And all of your actions that you took were voluntary of your own free will, is that right?
Yes.
All right. After you confirmed that Jacob Wetterling was dead, what did you do?
I left him and I went home.
All right. Where specifically? What?
Back to 121 Washburn Avenue, the Plaza Apartments, downtown Painesville.
How long did you remain at your home?
A couple hours or so.
After a couple of hours passed, did you return to the gravel pit where Jacob Wetterling was laying?
Yes, I did.
And what did you do?
I dragged him off about 100 yards off to the north of the site where I shot him.
What was your purpose in returning to the site?
To bury him.
And for what reason?
To hide the body.
Okay. And you said that you dragged Jacob Wetterling's body from the place where you shot him to about 100 yards off?
Yes.
Can you describe the area, please?
It would be to the north of the where I shot him. 100 yards to the northwest, northeast. Correction. I brought a shovel with me and it wasn't big enough, so I remembered there was a construction company next door. So I thought I would go over there and see if I could find a shovel, or else it would have taken me hours to dig the grave with a little shovel. When I got over there, I noticed there was a gale or a bobcat, and I'm familiar with operating one of those, and I remembered where they kept the key. What? I found the key and I started it up. I drove back to well, I turned the lights on to find out where I had left him, and I found him, and I dug a grave with the bobcat at the site.
Can you, as best as you recall, tell us about what time that was that you would have,
It was after midnight.
and this was a fairly remote area, is that right?
Yes.
And after you dug the grave with the bobcat, what did you do?
I placed Jacob in the grave, and then I covered it back up with the bobcat.
Okay. And was Jacob wearing all of his clothing at that time?
Yes, he was.
And can you recall or can you describe what you recall clothing he was wearing?
His reflective vest, his red jacket, blue sweatpants, tennis shoes came off when I put him into the grave. So I threw them. I didn't bury them with him in the grave. That is so sloppy. Anyway, keep on.
Okay, after you covered Jacob's body back up with the bobcat, you returned to the bobcat to the construction site?
Yes, I did.
Did you return to the site to make any effort to conceal what you did?
Yes, I did. I camouflaged the area with grass and brush. I should say I didn't return with my car. I walked back to the scene then.
You had walked back to the scene from your
From my
Painesville?
from my apartment. That's correct.
All right. And then after you returned the bobcat and camouflaged the site, did you walk back home?
I walked back home and threw his tennis shoes into a ravine about another 100 yards down the road.
What was your purpose in removing the shoes and throwing them?
I just noticed that I hadn't buried them with him, so
All right. And then you returned home.
that's correct. I'm just looking to see. That is crazy that he used a bobcat.
Mm-hmm. And his shirt was still, or his jacket was still sticking up. Like,
Yeah, and his jacket was still sticking out. That's crazy. I thought that too.
mm-hmm.
Oh, and then okay, so they do talk about that.
Well, just that he goes back. Like, I don't know that we have to keep reading the.
No, I don't mean that. I'm just saying about the jacket. They did say, did it cause you concern that you could see the jacket? Yes, it did. What did you do? I can't remember. I had a bag with me, a garbage bag. I placed his jacket, his bones, his skull into that bag to move. I figured I've got to move it. So he did it again.
Yeah, no, he moved it across the
Oh,
street.
across that road. Yeah.
Yeah.
You walked over the highway. That's crazy. And also, he felt the need to murder him because he had him masturbate with him.
Yeah, and like he panicked
And not
because
to
he saw a patrol car. I mean, I honestly, I call bullshit. I truly
right?
call bullshit. Yeah,
Like fuck off. There's no way. There
this
is
is
no way.
the epitome of minimizing and deflecting. Like he's such a piece of shit, and he's lying. But
That is so crazy. Oh, and then he goes into Jared. And honestly, I think that's such bullshit. And the fact that the one other person that could have told their story wasn't in the courtroom for this story. And he's saying, oh, yeah, we just masturbated, da, 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 da. And then it ends there. But then he has to go into specific detail or more common detail with what he actually did to these boys because Jared was there. I'm already reading it and like, yeah. So they're saying, so what he did to Jared was he attempted oral on Jared. He said that it didn't work out too good. So he asked Jared to do the same thing to him. Yes, he did. So he complied. And then, okay, so did you issue any instructions? He told him that he had to. Okay, so during that throw up part that we didn't quite know what it was that he commanded him to swallow. And if you throw up, I'll kill you. Wow. And he did attempt penetration, but he said that he stopped. Jesus.
I mean, he's a monster. He's a pedophile.
There's no way that's all he did before he shot a kid in the freaking head.
No.
He, if anything, he likely did more to Jacob than he had ever done before, and he knew, oh shit, I need to
That's
make sure
right.
that
And he
this is
probably
done.
left DNA, and you bet. You bet.
Oh, wow. Wow,
Just a
wow,
sad-
wow.
Sad
So
case, but thankfully he was found.
thankfully he's found, but he wasn't charged with murder. I want
I
to go
think
over
at
those charges, but my mouse is dead.
this Danny's age, the finality for the family to finally have Jacob home is worth something. And then they also got the full confession, right? So it wasn't a total wash. They
You're
knew what
telling me-
happened. They got him back. So he's in jail for the rest of his life or in prison for the rest of his life. So I understand why the family and the DA would go forward with this deal. I get it. So it doesn't matter what you're in prison for at some point. You've confessed to what they needed to know. And you got enough time on your sentence that it's a life sentence. You're going to die in prison. So I think
Is he gonna die in prison? That's what I'm looking for right now, to be like, okay, so if he got that many years, how old is he?
like,
He could see daylight.
I don't think so. They would have sentenced him to consecutive sentences for different counts. And
He was sentenced to
they-
20 years for child pornography, 2 months after confessing to abducting, molesting, and killing. So just 20 years, Shar. He's set to be released in 2021. Wait. Oh wait, no, that's somebody else. Oh, inmates. Peter Mandoff, the brother of Bernie Madoff. I don't know who they are. 20 years, and he was 53. So he could be out by the time he's 73. No, he would be out by the time he's 73.
But I don't know how the states work. Is it 20 years until he's eligible for parole?
No, he was sentenced to 20 years. He wasn't convicted or charged of murder.
No, I know. I understand that, but
It's just 20 years, period. 20 years is all he got.
Oh.
And that usually means 20 years and then maybe like parole in like 17 or 15.
2/3. I think they have to serve 2/3 of their.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean it's disturbing, but I don't. Is he still alive today?
yes.
Or did the prison justice get him?
Nope, he's alive and he's looking chunky, like a chunky monkey. I'm pretty upset at the end of this. This journey is pretty upsetting. Truly sorry for my evil acts. Jacob Wetterling's killer gets 20 years. Ugh.
But for me, if the family of Jacob is satisfied and they agreed, there's no amount of justice that's going to make them feel better. But if they agreed to that deal just to have Jacob home and knowing this man is going to be locked up for 20 years, then I support it. Then I'm all for it as long as the family is doing okay with it.
He could be released in 17 years, like I said. Wow.
Yeah. So by the time he's 70, and I mean, I don't know. Good luck making it that long. Pedophiles and child rapists don't really fare too well in prison.
Well,
if he's
done
in protective custody
in the last few years, because if you're thinking about the year, I believe it was 2016 that he was convicted. So he's already 8 years in, nearly halfway there already. It's unfortunate. Like you said, like if that's something that they agree to, then that's all right. But at the same time, it's really upsetting that even has to be something that they have to be okay with. So like that's why I'm not okay with it.
Mhm.
It's absolutely disgusting that all of that could happen and somebody could possibly only spend 17 years in prison.
Yeah.
There should be a system set up. And I understand, I guess, why it really wouldn't work because then nobody would ever actually confess or tell you where the body is. But there should be special cases where, like, a secret society can decide to lie, even on as a judge or in a court to say, "Yep, no, we'll drop all the charges to murder," and then like still be like, "Yeah, you're not getting out." That should still be an option for somebody who murders an 11-year-old
Mhm.
boy. And
Or
it's
like they
pretty
found
crazy.
19 3-ring binders full of child porn or porn, whatever. So every single picture can be one count. So I think I mean, I'm a little confused as to why it was only 20 years combined.
Because he wouldn't tell them where the body was unless they dropped all but one count of child
Oh,
pornography.
I see.
So
Okay, wow.
one
Well,
single.
like I said, it was just, you know, to have Jacob come home and have a full confession to know what happened would end so much torture for his family,
And start
really.
so much other torture for all of his victims that are still living and who will live past the point of him getting
Or,
out of prison if he does.
and maybe they can
Oh,
go after him at that point, or maybe there's
why?
something
So
that can
they
be
can
done
go
in
to
the meantime.
prison? They'll just go to prison if they do
No, no,
that.
no. I don't mean vigilante justice. I mean pursuing their own charges against him.
No, they can't.
Like, I don't know.
They can't because of this plea deal.
Yeah, but it was only Jacob and then child porn. But if there's other victims out there, I mean, that would be a completely separate thing. Like how
Mhm.
Danny said he told Jared this one thing, and Jared's like, no, he never said that. That didn't happen. Then so we know there's another victim out there, unless that happened with Jacob. That's
Yeah,
sad.
that's pretty fucked up. That is fricked right up.
It is.
I think I gotta move past this one because it's pretty crazy that
It is.
he's nearly halfway through that sentence and
Mhm.
all because he hit a body not too good. He gets to still kind of live his life.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
Sad.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. If you don't mind giving us a 5-star rating, it will help our show grow. You can also find us on Facebook, TikTok, and X at True Crime Story Podcast, where the discussion can continue. If you wish to contact us, you may do so via email at truecrimestorypod@gmail.com. Remember to send in your podcast episode case suggestions or requests. Hop over to our Patreon for bonus content, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com to support the show. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Bree,
And I'm Shar.
and we'll see you in the next chapter. Bye.
Bye.